Watershed. I think I have too much down there. This is kind of what I get to do every day. Set up programs. I teach a lot of community education. I go to schools, get kids out playing in the water for fish and birds. Great gig, right? I'll come up at the end and tell you a little bit about our programs, but right off the bat, we're going to get Maddie up here from the National Loons Center, and she's going to be our presenter for the night. So thank you all for coming. All right.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you, Anna, for that introduction. We're super excited to be here, super excited to see this many faces in the audience. We love that. We're going to do a little bit of an introduction about ourselves, about the Loons Center. Did anybody know that we were from the Loons Center? A couple people? Okay, great. Well, we're going to do a little bit of an introduction about us, about what we do, and then, of course, we're going to talk all about loons, and then we're going to talk about what we're really here for, which is how can we make the lakes in this area more loon friendly, how can we increase our loon population, how can we thereby increase the health of our lakes in the area too. So with that, I want to start with a little bit of an intro about the Loon Center, about us. Has anybody heard of the Loon Center before? More hands than I would have expected in this area, so I appreciate that. I'm going to leave you hanging a little bit and talk about us before we talk about the Loon Center, because it seems like it's like half and half. You guys know where we're at, who we are a little bit. So I'll leave you on the edge of your seat for that a little bit. But I'm going to introduce myself first. So my name is Maddie Disler. I'm the Education Outreach Manager at the National Loon Center. I've been in this position for about 2.5 years now. As you can imagine, all about educating folks in Minnesota about our loons, about the lakes that they require, about the habitat that is so unique to our area and our state that we're so lucky to have, and the ways that we can keep those protected. I do that for all ages. This is one of the few adult programs that we have in probably the month or so of January and February. We do a lot of youth programs as well. So we go to schools across the state. We go to schools in our area in Cross Lake, Minnesota. We go to the Brainerd Lakes area. But right now, I don't want to give away too much, but our education program is very much statewide. We are not as localized in Cross Lake for a reason that I will get to in just a second. But we love traveling across the state and seeing different audiences that care about our state bird and care about protecting it. So that's my job at the Loon Center. And then I also would like to introduce Bailey. Bailey, I'll just give you the microphone. I don't want the microphone.
Hello, I am Bailey Bessingpass, and I am currently serving as the Minnesota Green Corps member at the National Loon Center. For those of you who aren't familiar with Green Corps, it's a Minnesota-specific AmeriCorps program that's funded through the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. So I stepped in to fill Maddie's old position. She was the previous Green Corps member, and I'm working closely alongside her in education and outreach. I've got a little bit of a background in that, but my background is primarily in wildlife research. I've done a lot of field technician jobs, collecting data and helping with analyses for all kinds of different critters, but especially small forest carnivores. Yeah.
All right.
Another quick note, for my Green Corps service term, I need to get surveys from the people that I talk to. So I'm gonna hand a little pile of these at each table. You can just leave the leftovers in the middle and we'll grab them at the end.
We greatly appreciate all of your feedback because it makes our programs better. It gives us a chance to see what you guys think of it. If you hate it, we would love to know that too. You can leave it anonymously. We don't need your name or your info. We're not gonna hunt you down. But if you'd like to leave us some feedback, we'd greatly appreciate that. I'm also going to pass around this clipboard, which is a sign-up sheet for our newsletter called The Hoot. You'll see why that's appropriately named in a moment. The Hoot is a name of a loon call. So The Hoot it's typically bi-weekly, so we're just sending out information about our center, about our programs, about the building that we are building as we speak. And any fun facts about loons that we feel like you guys want to know or should know. So you don't have to sign up for that, but that's coming around if you'd like to throw your name on there. If you run out of room, there should be another sheet. If you run out of room on that sheet, just flip it over, write your name on the back too, that works. Perfect. Okay, so as you guys are getting all of your surveys and the newsletter going, I'm going to talk about the Loon Center itself. I'm going to use my fun clicker because I have that. Can you guys hear me okay with this microphone? Okay. I don't sound the best right now, so I apologize for my strong voice. So about the National Loon Center. We are located in Cross Lake, Minnesota, about half an hour north of Brainerd. Has anybody been to Cross Lake? Excellent, very good. Is everybody familiar with the Whitefish chain of lakes near Cross Lake? Very popular chain of lakes in Minnesota, very popular loon area, so a very appropriate place for the National Loon Center to be located. We are not a very old organization, actually. So we're a nonprofit that was founded in 2017 by a group of community members who got together and they said, we need something in Cross Lake that will bring money to our town, bring visitors to our town, but also something that is going to be productive. What can we all get together and do that we're going to feel good about? What can we do that is going to give back to our community, give back to our local environment, but give back to our state bird? And the state bird was the thing that everybody agreed upon. Kind of crazy to me that it took until 2017 for that to happen, because state bird has been the loon since 1961. And we also have, if you guys are familiar, and just to kind of give you a sense of what we are as an organization, if you guys know about the Wolf Center, the Bear Center in Ely, if you know about the Eagle Center in Watershed, or the Owl Center in Houston, or new to Minnesota, the Ruby-throated Hummingbird Center in Henderson. Ooh, I know, right? So if you guys are familiar with those organizations, we're pretty similar. So we're a nonprofit all about loons, lakes, and everything in between. The pillars that we surround all of our programs, all of our work around our research, education, and conservation. I'll give you some examples about that in just a little bit. But this is, honestly, as far as education goes, this is what it's all about. Speaking to people in the community that care about loons, speaking to people that live on shorelines that really, really care about making their shoreline and their lake healthy for not just loons, but the other wildlife in Minnesota that we really care about. Just because it's not a state bird doesn't mean we don't care about the other birds, right? You can have your thoughts about that. We love all birds at the Loon Center. So we are, as I said, trying to advance loon and freshwater education, not just in the state, but nationally and internationally as well. There are loons, as you can imagine, in other states. There are other loon conservation organizations in other states, in other parts of the country. We are the National Loon Center because we are the ones that are focusing our mission outside of just the state of Minnesota. We want to be collaborative across the entire loon habitat-friendly system. That was not a great way of saying that, but across the entire part of the country where loons live, across all those states, across the states where loons are living in the wintertime, not just during nesting season. We also want to partner with places like Canada and the loon populations and the organizations up there that are working on that. So, any questions about the Loon Center and what we do as an organization before I really get into the good stuff?
Is it open year round?
It is, yes. That is a fantastic segue into this slide. So a couple other things that, if you want to get involved with the Loon Center, if you want to know more about what we do, more about how you can participate. We do have not just programs like this. If you have an organization yourself, you're like, maybe I have a lake association and I really am interested in having a presentation like this to speak to my lake association members. We've got cards over there. You can always hit us up for that. We've got forms on our website that you can fill out, request programs through there. You can also come visit us in person. If you want to see our temporary center, maybe I'll talk about that first. We do have a temporary center because our current center is under construction. So we do not, this photo is not real. This is a trick. No, just kidding. This is a rendering of what the new building will look like. So we started this facility just last fall. The building itself and exhibits and everything will be open for the public in May of 2027. So put that on your calendars. But this is what the facility will eventually be. It'll be interactive, it will be immersive. It's 3 stories, 19,000 square feet, all about the life of the loon and everything that we're going to talk about tonight in a very cool, technology-filled exhibit way. It's very exciting. So if you want to visit that center, come in 2027 in May. But if you want to visit us now, we are open year-round. We do have a temporary visitor center in Cross Lake. right in the town square. We have some exhibits and things in there. We have some information. We always have staff and volunteers in there to talk to you if you want to know, you have questions about your loons, you want to know how you can get involved, you can always come talk to us there. We have winter hours now, so it's like Wednesday, Bailey, right? Wednesday through Friday? Okay, Wednesday through Friday right now. Summertime is Monday through Saturday, no, Tuesday through Saturday. And then we also have this summer program that we love so much for people to come visit. If you have not been to Cross Lake, this is a great way to get exposed to the whitefish chain, great way to get exposed to the loons on the lake and to the National Loon Center. We have a pontoon boat called the Stewardship. Get it? Yeah. So the boat itself is called the Stewardship, but the program is called the Loon Pontoon. So we give free pontoon rides out on Cross Lake, and we go around the lake and we see. Am I talking louder now? So we go around the lake and we see all the local loons. We see their nesting sites. We see the chicks as they grow throughout the summer, and that is a free program. And we are very proud that we can have this free to the public and free to all Minnesotans and folks even who don't live in Minnesota that don't know what a loon is, but they just want to know, like, I'm visiting the lakes area and I don't know how to behave around loons. I don't know how loons are going to behave around me. What can I do to be a good steward while I'm visiting? So that's a really cool program. You can sign up online. Our website is nationalloonscenter.org, so check us out and all the programs that we have available there. Yay, Loon Center. I have to show this photo again because it's just so cool. I do want to point out that this is going to be a building that is, I think, entirely net zero. Not entirely, almost net zero carbon emissions. So very cool. It's got geothermal, it's got the solar panels. It's amazing. Okay, if there's no questions about the Loon Center itself, I'm going to really quick zoom through some fun ecology facts about loons, some things that you might notice if you haven't been around loons before, maybe some things that you didn't know, and we'll talk about that, and then I'll give the floor to Bailey. Bailey's going to talk all about our Share Our Shoreline program and ways that you all can get involved in loon stewardship and lake stewardship and beyond. So with that, the common loon, also known as the Great Northern Diver over in Europe. That's a mouthful, so we just call them the loon here. It kind of makes sense, though, that we do say that because the Scandinavian word for loon actually means clumsy. In Minnesota, many of us are Scandinavians, so there you go. There's your fun fact of the day. If you've ever seen a loon walking on land, you can know that that tracks and that it's an appropriate name. Oftentimes, if you're not familiar with where you're going to find loons, most of the time they're going to be on those northern boreal lakes in, I'll put up a map in a second, but it's typically anywhere between central and northern Minnesota. Obviously, I don't know, do you guys consider yourself central Minnesota down here? Yeah? Not the cities. You're not the cities. Okay, great. I love that argument. That's so funny. Okay, so I'm going to say that then. Central to northern Minnesota, that's where you're going to find those loons on really large lakes. Large, deep, clear water lakes is typically where you're going to find them. Some exceptions exist to that, but we'll talk mostly about where you would find them most of the time. I have a fun fact here on the bottom. I like to point this out, that loons are one of the oldest living lineages of birds ever. There are some scientists that believe that they are the oldest, which is crazy to think about, but they are most closely related to penguins. Thus, they can't walk well. There you go. Just a fun fact I like to throw out there. So here's a little bit about what we're looking at in Minnesota as far as our population goes for loons. As you can see, that orange rusty color, that is where loons like to hang out for the most part in the summer. This map is a little bit dated, as you might imagine. I went down to Faribault a couple of years ago, which is there. And I said, do you guys have loons? And they said, we haven't had loons in 20 years. So that map might be receding a little bit. It might be heading a little bit further north than we might have previously thought. And we'll talk about why when Bailey comes up to share about that as well. So in Minnesota, we have about 12,000 common loons, which may not seem like a lot, but compared to the rest of the country, we have quite a bit of loons. We have, compared to other states, we have the second most land mass that's appropriate for loon habitat. The other state is Alaska. Very good. As you can tell, Alaska obviously has just plain more land mass than us. They have a lot more available habitat and more suitable habitat than other states. We do have kind of over in the Northeast, obviously the Midwest, like Wisconsin, Michigan, they've got a good population. But over in the Northeast, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, even New York, they've got some loons over there. So that's where you'll find some of the other loon conservation organizations too. But we do have the most in the lower 48 states. A little bit about migration, because they're not here right now. If you haven't noticed, it's cold out and our loons are not here. So if you're wondering where they have gone, most of our loons in Minnesota, they follow the Mississippi Flyways through that yellow little strip there. They are following the Mississippi Flyway all the way down to the Gulf. Some of them do go east to the Atlantic coast, but most of them will go to the Gulf Coast. Some of them, however, don't go to the coast. They will go to large freshwater lakes such as Lake Jocassee. Has anybody heard of Lake Jocassee in South Carolina? No? Okay. Well, you have now, so this is a fun learning experience for you. So Jocassee in South Carolina is a man-made reservoir. It's 7,500 plus acres. I can never remember that number. So it's a really big reservoir, and it's freshwater. Usually loons, when they migrate, they go to saltwater because they have this special saltwater gland that changes depending on the season. So they can flick it on when it's wintertime and they're in the salt water, and that helps filter the salt while they're swimming. And then when they're up here in freshwater, they just turn it off. So they are very much capable of going from freshwater to saltwater, but some of the loons, they won't go all the way to the coast. They'll go down to these freshwater lakes, for example, like Lake Jocassee. And there are some really cool things that we can see down there when we're studying. I say we. Our biologist, Natasha, we send her down there every March to do winter loon monitoring for their spring migration. And she gets to see some really cool things, different behaviors that we don't get to see up here in the summer, and also some different types of loons. So this loon right here is a Pacific loon. Did you guys know that there were Pacific loons? Wow. There's actually 4 species of uncommon loons. So we have, obviously, in Minnesota, the common loon is the most common, but that is the only one that we have here in our state. Sometimes you'll see these other guys when they're on their migration route down to the Gulf or down to wherever they're going if they're coming from Canada. But these guys mostly live up in the northernmost parts of Canada and Alaska. Some of them live even over in Eurasia, parts of northern Eurasia. But we won't find these guys here in Minnesota. They need a little bit different conditions, much colder conditions. But we have the red-throated loon, Pacific loon, Arctic loon, and the yellow-billed loon, in addition to the common loon. So we want to give love to all the other species too. Okay, this is by far my most favorite slide. As you can imagine. I do also want to point out that we got really lucky with our common loon because these guys do not sound as fun and as pretty as our loon does. So we lucked out there too. So hopefully everybody has heard these calls before. I'm going to go through them really, really quick. I'm going to play them. I'm going to tell you what they mean. Everybody close your eyes. Pretend you're on the lake. Pretend you're, not in 0-degree Minnesota right now. So first I'm going to play the hoot. This one is their short range call. So this is the one that you're probably not going to hear as often because it's very soft. This is it's a very intimate call. When the chicks are next to each other or the adults are next to each other, the pair members, the parents are trying to talk to their chicks. This is the call that they're going to use for that. Hopefully it works. If you can't hear it, just yell at me. I'll try and turn it up. Okay, so that was the hoot. Very small, very cute. Love it. Okay, so this next one is the wail. So the hoot is their short distance call. The wail is going to be their long distance call. So this is the one that you'll often hear at nighttime or in the morning when the loons are separated. Sometimes one pair will stay on the territory and one pair member will stay on the territory and the other one will go across the lake, maybe to a separate lake. And this is how they stay in touch. This is how they make sure the other one is still okay. This call can reach quite a long distance. I don't know if we know exactly how many miles it can reach. Bailey, do you have a number off the top of your head? No? Okay. You might. I figured I'd ask. But we don't know how long it can reach because it varies. Every loon has a little bit different call. They're capable of a little bit different things, but usually it can be heard over several miles. So when you're hearing those loon calls late at night, this is typically what it is.
That never gets old. So that was the whale, and this third one is called the tremolo. The tremolo is hopefully one that you've heard before. This is often what you'll hear when loons are flying overhead. So if they're flying over a lake, this is what they're going to use to let the other loons on the lake know, hey, I might be wanting to land here. If there's a very territorial male, they may respond and say, hey, this is not a good place for you to land. The loon will continue. So this is typically what that's for. Oftentimes you'll also hear this as kind of like a signal alarm, like if an eagle flies overhead or something else is making them uncomfortable, they'll use the tremolo to communicate with the other loons, say, hey, there's something threatening, just be aware of it. Also an iconic call. Hopefully you recognize that one. And then finally, this last one is called the yodel. This one is very unique because only the males can make this call, because this is the defense call. This is the one that they're using to establish their territory, to defend their territory. Usually they're doing some research on this about how exactly the yodel correlates to each male, how the loons can tell each other apart this way. But typically, as with many species, the bigger the bird, like the larger the male, the deeper the call is, and vice versa. So if there's a particularly deep yodel out on the lake, then the other males know, ooh, that's a big guy. I don't want to go mess with his territory. Iconic. Can anybody make a loon call? You're on the spot now. Here we go. Nobody ever says yes, so this is amazing. It's coming. It's in there. I love it. Fantastic. Very good. Thank you for volunteering, because nobody ever says yes when I ask that question, and it's very awkward afterward. So, yeah, right. It's winter. You got some time to work on it. You're good. I love it. Oh, it's going to play them all again. 1 second. Nope. Okay, there we go. You could hear, though, in the yodel, there were some other loon calls in the background. It wasn't just the yodel, so it sounded like there's a little bit of some kind of conversation going on, maybe a little bit of a kerfuffle, just a little loon conflict. Okay, so some of the things that I want to talk about before I hand it over to Bailey, just some basic loon ecology, some things that you might notice throughout nesting season when our loons return. So we say that typically the nesting season is from May through September. They are not physically on the nest this entire time, but they do have chicks with them. We don't consider chicks having fledged the nest until they fledge their home lake at the end of the summer. So we typically say May through September is the formal nesting season. So when ice hopefully melts, based on the last week, it doesn't look like it will, but it will. Last winter we had a pretty late, or I guess in the grand scheme of things, pretty early ice out. So we had loons return a little bit earlier. How they know that the ice is ready for them to return? We don't always know. It's a mystery how they are able to read the weather signals and everything down in the Gulf and then come up in time. We will sometimes have some loons that come up early, and they'll find either the Mississippi or some open lakes down in southern Minnesota. And then when they know that it's warm enough that the lakes up north are thawed, then they can go back up north. So some folks down in southern Minnesota, they'll be like, hey, I've had loons that stop on my lake in the spring, but they don't stay. They move on. They're just waiting for the northern lakes to get thawed. So typically it's around, sometimes it's as early as March, but usually it's around April when the loons start to return. You'll get the males come back first. They will establish their territory. Usually they return to the same territory year after year. They're very materialistic birds, and they are more attached to their territory than they are to their mate. So I'm going to ask a question that might be controversial. How many people think loons mate for life? Oh, now nobody wants to raise their hand because I just said it's a controversial question. Well, okay, you are smart to not raise your hand then, because it is true. Loons do not mate for life. They are more attached to their territory and to their nesting area than they are to their partner. So if they have a couple of seasons where they can't successfully hatch chicks, they will find another partner. If their pair member does not make it back from migration, or if they suffer a boat strike or any other threat, they will find a new pair member. And it's quite a struggle to find an open territory that has decent nesting. It's a struggle to find a mate that is mature enough and available and has a territory established. So it's kind of a tough world if you don't have your pair and your territory established, and you have to, like, if you're a juvenile loon that's coming up to mate for the first time, and I'll talk about that whole situation in a second. But it can be tough to try to find a nesting area. Yeah.
If they do have a territory and they are successful mating, do they continue to be the same? So if it works, don't fix it. They keep repeating.
Yeah, totally.
If it doesn't work.
Totally. So if they are able to keep nesting year after year and they have chicks year after year, they will continue to do so. If there's nothing stopping them and they're successful, they're going to keep doing what they do. Absolutely. Great question. Yeah, great question. So then we get to the actual nesting. So when the males come up first, they are finding that territory, establishing the nest, and then the females return after that, shortly after that, and they will, do what females do and make the nest home, and rebuild from last year, maybe find a new nest if they need to. And then typically around mid to late May, even sometimes early June, that is when nesting officially starts. And the parents will take turns once the eggs are laid. They will take turns for 28 days. They'll switch pretty evenly. There are some people that have their loon pair and they have it to a schedule. Like, oh yeah, the male switches at 12 o'clock midnight, and then they switch again at noon. I don't know how true that is, but some people have a schedule. Some of the loons are pretty predictable. But they will switch on and off pretty evenly. They will incubate the eggs. They will try to have one pair member on the nest at all times so that they can, keep them at the appropriate temperature. Make sure that if there's predators around, that they're not able to get into the nest, things like that. But there are a lot of things that Bailey will talk about that are spooking loons off of the nest and will open the nest up for predation, which is a big problem that we see, especially in, I guess, all over Minnesota, but especially in the Cross Lake area. That's a big issue that we're starting to see. So when they're looking for their nest, they're looking for a nice place on the shoreline typically. So a nice natural area. This top photo is a fantastic example. There's a lot of natural vegetation in the background. You can see right on the shore, there's a lot of nice reeds and grasses to keep them hidden, keep them protected. A lot of vegetation and sediment to make their nest bowls out of. And it's right up close to the actual surface of the water. So they don't make their nest too far off of the actual shore because they need easy access in and out of the nest. They also want their nest to be in a place that's not very busy, not very, not a very human populated area, not somewhere where there's going to be a lot of boat action. So, for example, on Cross Lake here, you can see, can everybody hear me? Okay. If you can see on Cross Lake, there's a couple of islands right here in the middle. Sometimes they'll choose an island because that's a nice natural place and not somewhere that's going to have a lot of mammalian predators on land that they have to worry about. And then sometimes they will choose, actually most of the time, they'll choose a nice little secluded bay that doesn't have a lot of wave or boat action either. They won't probably choose anything on this side of the lake right here because there's a lot, if you've been on Cross Lake, there's a lot of boat and wave activity happening on that side of the lake. There's no protection from wind. There's some development, but that's besides the point. That's just not an ideal place that loons would want to nest. So if you were looking on your own lake, I would look for little islands like that, little secluded bays, somewhere like a nice little corner of the lake that's not very busy.
So do loons like ponds?
Ooh, great question. Do loons like ponds? So,
Ponds.
yeah, typically no. So they need a lot of space because several reasons. One, they need a lot of fish in their habitat, obviously. They are almost exclusively eating fish. There are some other species thrown in their diet too, but it's mostly fish, and they are typically going for things like most of the stuff that we like to eat, like panfish. Why am I thinking of zero fish right now? Oh my gosh. Panfish, walleye if they can get it, bass if they can get it. But the one that they really, really like is whitefish or cisco, and those are found in those big, deep, clear lakes. So they don't typically like ponds for food availability, but they also don't like them because they are small and hard to land on and hard to take off from. So loons, you can see our friend Bob up here. Bob was named by a third grader. But Bob is a real life loon. He's taxidermy. But you can see that's a big bird. That is a lot of weight to get up off the water. They also have solid bones because they are built for swimming and diving and not for flying. So other birds have hollow bones that they can soar through the air with. Bob has solid bones, so he can swim better. That makes him really heavy. So it takes a lot of wing power and a lot of strength to get up off the water, which means they have to basically sprint across the surface of the water for about, sometimes up to a quarter of a mile before they can get up in the air. So they need really, really big surface area lakes, typically. Sometimes they will nest on smaller lakes if the nesting is good and if there's a nearby larger lake that has really good fishing. And they'll nest, and then they'll go over and fish, and then come back. But most of the time, it's a little bit larger body of water.
Is there a correlation between the size of the lake and how many pairs will be nesting on them? Smaller the lake, the fewer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically, hypothetically, yes. So the larger the lake, ideally the larger population of loons there should be, but if the lake is just a big round lake, like it could be 1,000-acre lake, but if it's just a circle, there's not enough contour of the lake for there to be good nesting areas and good breakup of the territories. On a lake like Cross Lake, there's a lot of contour, there's lots of little bays, little unique areas that loons are more likely to nest in. So that is typically where you're going to find more loons. So it depends on what the lake itself looks like. They typically need about 60 to 120 acres, again, depending on the lake, for their territory. So,
They usually
yes.
keep the nests far apart from each other.
Yes, they do not like to interact at all during the nesting season. They need their space. They need space to raise their chicks, space to fish, and they don't like having nests too close to each other. Which brings me to artificial nesting platforms. Does everybody know what an artificial nesting platform is? Has anybody heard of one? And you're like, oh, I know kind of what that is. Kind of? Okay. So if you don't know what an artificial nesting platform is, that is kind of a way that but loon enthusiasts in general, so the Minnesota DNR and the U.S. Geological Survey are working right now on a study to find out how useful these nests actually are. So in areas on the lakes where we have a lot of development, on places where maybe the water level fluctuates really, really, frequently throughout the summer, maybe there's a lot of predation, maybe there's just not enough natural sites to begin with. This is one way to kind of augment that loss of habitat. So as you can imagine, it's just a floating artificial nesting platform, usually made out of like PVC pipes or cedar wood or something like that that floats, and then it's anchored to the bottom of the lake. And it's not right on the shoreline. Usually it's a little bit off the shoreline, so that it fluctuates with the water level if that ever is an issue. Sometimes you'll get the avian guards over it if eagles are a big problem. And it can be a pretty good substitute. We don't, how do I say this? We don't hate the nests because obviously they're doing good things for the loon population. It's a good substitute. But of course we want the loons to be nesting naturally. They've been doing it for 56 million years and we want them to continue doing it without our help. But sometimes we have to intervene. That's just the way that it goes. So we have been testing out the artificial platforms. If you are interested in the guidelines for those, we do have a handout on the table over there, and you can pick that up. You can ask us some questions, but there are some guidelines that you want to follow because you don't want to just plop a nest down and create an entire new territory if there's already established territories, right? You don't want to pull loons off of their natural nesting site if they're already nesting just fine on the natural site, right? So there's some things to consider, but they can be a really good substitute. They are a lot of work, but they're definitely like, we have resources, the DNR has resources, so we would love to help you get involved in that if that's something that is appropriate for your lake. And then really quick, another little thing that we notice, some folks like to put out signs that say loons nesting here, please be careful. That could be a good way to keep folks from boating or recreating too close to the nests. Could also be a good way for people to be like, oh, there's a loon nest over there. I'm going to go stand in it and take pictures of it, because, people do that. So it can be kind of a double-edged sword, just another thing to consider and kind of weigh the pros and cons of that. So really quickly, the life cycle of a chick. We are starting nesting season in, as I said, May. So the chicks are usually hatched anywhere from early June to hopefully not this late, but sometimes as early as the 4th of July. And throughout all of that, the early nesting season, when the chicks are really, really little, they will be riding on mom and dad's back for the first couple of weeks because they're really small and they are bite-sized. They are good snacks for things like eagles, things under the water like snapping turtles, northern pike, muskie, things like that. So they stay nice and cozy under the feathers of mom and dad's back. And then after a couple of weeks, they get a little bit bigger. They grow pretty quickly throughout the summer. They'll start to lose that fluffy, downy fur that they're hatched with and get juvenile feathers. And then by the end of the summer, this is about 9 to 11 weeks old, they are starting to practice their own flights. They're diving for themselves. They're fishing for themselves. Mom and dad are still in the picture, but not entirely, they're not entirely dependent on them. So that is what the juveniles look like. They will migrate down to the Gulf. They're with the adults their first year, and then they will return 3 to 5 years after that because they are such a long-lived bird and they take a long time to mature, so they don't come back up and start nesting right away. So they take a little bit to get to the point where they can come back up and start mating. I'm going to skip the behaviors for now because I'll just show you the pictures. If there's time at the end, I'll come back to this, but I want to give Bailey her section here. I'll talk about the pre-migration behaviors. So one thing that you guys may notice, usually around August through October, or September, usually October is included in there. I'll lump that in. Social gatherings called rafts. So loons will gather together at the end of the summer because there's not really a lot for them to be territorial about. So they can gather together and fish together and then get ready for migration. So you'll see it could be as few as 4 or 5 loons together. It could be as many as 150 on the same lake. So keep an eye out for that in the fall. Molting is another very common behavior, not even common. This happens to all loons. At the end of the summer, the adults will start to lose their checker pattern. That red eye that we're so used to seeing turns to a brownish color. And they will completely lose all of their flight feathers once they get down to the Gulf after they've done their migration. Here we have a photo of an adult loon in its winter plumage and a juvenile loon in its juvenile plumage. Can you guys tell who's who?
Do they travel in flocks like some of the others?
They will sometimes travel in like loose groups, but they definitely don't fly in like a formation or anything like geese or other ducks. Great question. All right, what do we think? Adult is on which side? The adult is actually the one on the left. So the left one you can tell because he's a little more disheveled looking. It's still got that red eye, but eventually that will turn to brown. They're losing their feathers kind of gradually. The juvenile, these are all brand new feathers. These are the feathers that they just grew this summer and this fall. You can tell because of the scalloping on the edge of the feathers, the little white edge. That's a good way to tell for sure. Okay, so one more thing about loon ecology before I pass it off. Quick question, yeah?
Which ones are males and which ones are females?
Ooh, that's the age-old question. They look identical. So if I go back to this slide right here, you could not tell if any of these are male or females. There's no way. So they all look, as far as like their plumage goes, that's always identical. Very, very rarely you'll have, not very rarely, but sometimes you'll have a male that's a little bit bigger than the female, and then you can kind of tell that way. The only real way of knowing is if you see the male make that yodel call. That's the only real way if you're on the lake. That's the easiest way to tell. Or if you literally watch the female lay an egg. That's probably not as likely, but the yodel is typically the easy way to know. That's a great question, though. So last thing that I want to talk about is the loon ecology and as far as what they are eating. I kind of talked about this already, but Cisco, whitefish, those really cold water, deep water fish are very, very much a key species for the loon because they're very high in fat and they're very calorically dense. Because they live in cold water, they have a lot more fat. And the loons know that. And so they can, when the lakes turn over in the fall, when the cold water mixes with the warm water, the fish come up to the middle, right? You guys know what I'm talking about. The lakes turn over and the cold water comes up. The fish come up with it. The loons know that, and they'll go down to the middle of the water column where those Cisco are hanging out, and they'll fish for those like crazy. And that's how they bulk up before migration. So as far as habitat goes, that's why we really, really care about those cold water lakes. That's why cold water fisheries are really, really important, not just for those fish, but for all the animals that survive on it, the loons included. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Bailey. She's going to talk about loons as an indicator species, some things that we've noticed that are challenging for our loons, and things that we can do to reduce those challenges. Thanks, Bailey.
Everyone give it up for Maddie. What a great job. All right, so we're gonna jump into, like Maddie said, loons as an indicator species. So what an indicator species is, I'm just gonna take it off the stand here. So these are organisms whose presence and abundance reflect the overall quality of the ecosystem. So if something's going wrong with loons, we know something's going wrong with the whole ecosystem. Loons are also what's called an umbrella species, which means that if we strategically protect loon habitat, we're protecting the habitat of a lot of other animals. So why are they an indicator species? What makes them good for this? So they're a long-lived species. On average, a loon is going to live about 20 to 30 years, but some have been documented getting close to 40. So a very long time. Because they're so long-lived, toxins in the environment, like mercury, they can bioaccumulate in their systems over time. So if there are these large issues with pollution, we're probably going to see the results of that eventually in loons. Additionally, kind of tying into that, loons are a top predator in their ecosystem. There's not really much that's going to go after an adult loon. So they're on the top of the food chain. These toxins have time to bioaccumulate in all of the prey species that they're consuming, and then they end up in these really high concentrations in the loons. Additionally, because they're a top predator, all of those lower levels of the food chain need to be healthy in order for the loons to survive and get enough food. They also need undeveloped shoreline habitat like Maddie talked about. Loons prefer to nest on sheltered natural shorelines. So if we've got sheltered natural shorelines, that's a pretty good sign that the whole ecosystem is going to be doing better than a really developed water body. Loons are also a visual predator, so they need really clear water to hunt. They do this behavior called peering, where they just stick their little heads in the water, kind of like you're laying on a floaty with goggles on. And they look around for fish, and then they chase them. So when we see reductions in water clarity, that makes it really, really difficult for loons to hunt. So all of these things tie into, this isn't just what's happening on the lake a loon's living on, it's what's happening in the whole watershed. So loon protection requires watershed protection. How do we know how the loons are doing in Minnesota? That is through a handy-dandy program called the Minnesota Loon Monitoring Program. This program was established in 1994, and it consists of 6 index areas throughout the state. Each of these index areas has 100 lakes in it, and every year, volunteers survey every one of those 600 lakes. So it's really unique that our state loon monitoring program is run by people like you, volunteers, citizen scientists, and people who generally just care about loons. And what we found in the 30 years or so of this data set is that the population is pretty stable overall. There's some ups, there's some downs, it's a little different between index areas, but overall, it's pretty stable. However, the juvenile population is declining. So that means that we're seeing reduced reproductive success in loons, not at a crazy decrease, but we are seeing that go down. And why might that be? It's from this whole bundle of threats that the loons have to contend with. And we'll go into a little more detail about some of these, and some we'll just gloss over a little bit. There's more information available on our website and lots of other websites. I wish we had time to go through in extreme detail on all of them, but we'll cover the really big ones. So disease and pathogens are something that loons are going to struggle with. Avian influenza affects some loons. It's not one of the species it's most prominent in, but avian botulism is a big one. And this is a disease that's really closely related with aquatic invasive species. So we'll go into a little more detail about that later. But avian botulism is a particular issue in the Great Lakes region. So as loons are migrating and they stop over in the Great Lakes, that's where most of them are affected with avian botulism. And it's pretty nasty business. It kind of slowly paralyzes the loon, and eventually they can't lift their head out of the water and they can't really move anymore. So it's a pretty grim one. Another thing we've already mentioned a little bit is environmental toxins. We talked about mercury a little bit. Pesticides are going to be an issue, but the really, really big one for loons is lead. So most of that lead is coming from lead fishing tackle, and that is pretty much 100% of the time fatal to loons. If that loon ingests any lead, it's probably going to die within 2 to 4 weeks. Fishing line entanglement's another one we'll talk about a little bit more. Disturbance from human recreation. So this is going to be things like boats, like people fishing right next to loons, people generally bothering loons and stressing them out and preventing them from doing the natural behaviors they need to do to survive. Another one that kind of ties in with that is habitat loss. Most of this lost habitat is from shoreline development. We've also got impaired water quality from all kinds of sources, but particularly aquatic invasive species and pollution. We'll go a little bit more into that. Oil spills aren't something we worry so much about when loons are on their summer territory, but in the winter, that's when it can start to be a problem. The big Exxon Valdez spill, Deepwater Horizon that happened right around here, that killed a lot of loons. So when they're wintering on the Gulf or the Atlantic and there's an oil spill, loons are going to be affected by that. And then climate change. This map that we've got here, this is how the loon range is projected to shift in the coming decades. So if you kind of watch this, based on the best models that we have available, by 2050, loons won't be able to nest in Minnesota anymore. Their range is going to shift significantly northward as the conditions up north reflect what Minnesota is right now. So when we were talking about Maddie earlier, how there used to be loons down in Faribault, we're already seeing a little bit of that northward range contraction. So getting a little bit more into fishing, we talked about lead being the really big one. This is generally recognized as the #1 cause of known mortality in adult loons. Nationwide, it accounts for up to 20% of annual deaths. In the Northeast, it's accounted for close to 50% of loon deaths. And how the heck do the loons get that lead tackle? A big way is if you're fishing, loons are visual predators. So they see that fish that you're reeling in, and they don't know that there's a hook in it, so they bite the fish off your line, and then they ingest the tackle that was used to catch that fish. Or if your line gets stuck on something and you have to cut it and leave it in the water, the loon might end up ingesting that tackle. Another big problem is these guys right here, these split-shot sinkers. So those can easily end up on the bottom of the lake, and something that loons do to help digest their food is eat little pebbles off of the bottom of the lake. They store them in their gizzard, and it helps them grind the food. Loons don't chew their food, so the pebbles in the gizzard help them grind it before they swallow it. So to a loon, that split-shot sinker looks exactly like a pebble, and it's really easy for them to ingest it. Fishing line entanglement, again, if a loon is going for a fish that is actively being reeled in, they can get tangled up. If there's loose line, they can get tangled up. And typically, because a loon doesn't have arms, its response to having something tangling it is going to be to try to use its bill to get free. That results in the line getting wrapped around the bill, and then unfortunately, they starve if there's no intervention because they can't get that line off their bill. So what can you do about that? There are a lot of ways that we can fish loons safe. The biggest one here is going to be using non-toxic, non-lead tackle. So this is something, there's no legislation prohibiting lead tackle, but we are seeing industry-driven efforts to offer more non-lead alternatives. Lindy has committed to having fully non-lead tackle options, I believe by 2027 or 2028. So that's really exciting. You can also look for loons before you cast. Like if there's a loon 5 feet from you and you're trying to fish out of your canoe, probably just don't fish there. Wait for the loon to go away or give it some space before you cast that line out. And the other thing is clean up fishing line. And while you're cleaning up your fishing line, just for good measure, cut it into small pieces. That makes sure no matter where your fishing line ends up, whether it gets recycled or thrown away, that it's never going to tangle anything up because the pieces will be too small. There are also recycling options for your fishing line at a lot of like county offices and sporting game stores. Another one we've talked about briefly is recreation disturbance. So these are the problems that boats cause for loons. The really obvious problems that boats cause for loons are when they hit them. That can injure loons, it can kill loons. But even if the boats don't actually hit the loons, it can still be really stressful. And when an animal is under constant stress, just like us when we're under constant stress, they're kind of worse at living. It makes it a lot harder to do the things that they need to do to survive. And so these threats that aren't necessarily from the boats themselves, but are from the wakes, that can wash eggs right out of a nest. It can separate chicks from their parents. It can also be really stressful. It can spook loons off their nest. And I don't know how many of you saw the article published by NPR last year about the research that came out on the effects that these high-powered wake boats have on the lake bed and on the shoreline. But these really high-powered wake boats people are using for all of these aquatic sports like wake surfing and wakeboarding, that's essentially tearing up the lake bed, and it's destabilizing all of the plants that are supposed to be in place there and supporting the ecosystem from the bottom up. So again, these loons are an indicator species. And when things go wrong with the whole lake ecosystem, that's going to affect loons pretty directly. So how do we enjoy our boats as good Minnesotans do while looking out for the loons? There are some great steps you can take. So we've got some recommended distance guidelines. In addition to just kind of watching out for loons, look where you're going. If you're going through really good loon habitat, try to slow your boat down a little bit and make sure that you're not going to run into them. If you do want to stop and watch the loons, we recommend you give them about 100 feet of space. Sometimes, as some of you have attested, the loons are pretty habituated to people. They might approach you closer than 100 feet. Just leave it on their terms. Just give them 100 feet. If they come closer, then it's your lucky day. We recommend a 200-foot buffer between the shoreline and your boat while you're creating a wake. That helps shield the shoreline, all those great plants that are holding the soil in place. That makes sure that they don't get torn up by the wake. And if you're really blasting that wake and you're doing the wake surfing and wakeboarding activities, we recommend a 500-foot buffer between you and the shoreline. So those are things that really make the most sense on big lakes that are deep. And this is a group of passengers aboard our loon pontoon, the Stewardship. You can see that they are very respectfully watching loons in the distance by using binoculars. So another big threat to loons that we've touched on briefly is aquatic invasive species. I'm sure all of you are at least a little bit familiar with aquatic invasive species, but these are species that are not native to an ecosystem, that somehow make it to that ecosystem and proliferate a bit out of control. Why does that matter? For one, it disrupts our native ecosystems. It disrupts the nutrient cycles, it disrupts the food chain, it can have all kinds of unanticipated effects. Everything truly is so interconnected that when we change any one of those pieces, it changes a lot more than we would think. They also can inhibit fishing and recreation. This guy right here is called starry stonewort. It's a really highly invasive algae that forms super dense mats, like blankets, on the water, and you can't drive a boat through it, you can't swim through it, you can't fish in it, fish can't really eat it. So it's really kind of a lose-lose when we get an aquatic invasive species like that in our lakes. They can also cause a lot of economical damage to infrastructure, like these zebra mussels here. They love to crust over pipes. They love to crust over boats, over boat lifts. So again, the aquatic invasive species are really a lose, 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 lose. They affect everything, and it's really important to do what we can to not spread them. If we look at this map has color-coded counties displaying the number of infested lakes in each of them. That's where the Loons Center is located, up there in Crow Wing County. We got the metro area down here. We've got a lot of lakes that are infested with at least one aquatic invasive species. Many of them are infested with more than one aquatic invasive species. And I said I'd come back to the zebra mussels here. The zebra mussels contribute to avian botulism because they create the perfect conditions for the bacteria that causes avian botulism to grow on the bottom of the lake. So the zebra mussels filter everything out of the water. The bacteria have the conditions that they need to thrive, and then they start spreading the toxin up the food chain. And in the Great Lakes, they also have an invasive fish called the round goby. The round goby eats those zebra mussels. It gets that toxin for the avian botulism, and then it keeps going up and up the food chain until it gets to the loons. Zebra mussels also concentrate methylmercury. So this is the biological form of mercury that can cause adverse health effects. I saw on the schedule there that Dr. Gretchen Hansen is going to come and speak about how zebra mussels influence the presence of mercury in our fish. So they definitely affect fish in that way, and because loons eat fish all the time, they're going to affect loons as well. So what can we do about aquatic invasive species? We can clean, drain, and dry our gear. So by law in Minnesota, every time you move your boat, a life jacket, floaty, what have you, from one body of water to another, you're required to clean it, remove any visible debris or plants. You're required to drain it. So if you've got a boat, you want to make sure the wells are drained, the plugs are pulled, the motor's drained. Basically, any hole in your boat, you want to make sure it's open. So as you're transporting it, everything can drain out. A lot of these aquatic invasive species, when they're fully mature, you can see them pretty well. But the zebra mussels have a pretty much microscopic form called veligers that are the little baby zebra mussels, and those you can't see at all. So you really have no idea you're transporting them when you just have that water sitting in your equipment. If you really want to go the extra mile and make sure that no AAS can sneak on your gear between lakes, you can use a cold water rinse. You can decontaminate with hot water. And the DNR also provides quite a few courtesy decontamination sites throughout the state. So especially if you're fishing one lake in the morning and trying to fish another lake in the afternoon, you can hit one of those decontamination stations for free, and they'll make sure your boat is clean and dry and ready to go to the next one. So shoreline development's a really big one that we're gonna probably spend the most time on today. In Minnesota, we have an estimated 50% of our natural shorelines remaining, and an additional 1 to 2% are lost each year. So shorelines that are natural and don't have buildings and sandy beaches on them, that's a really, really precious resource. And how this connects to loons, that's where they nest. They need those natural shorelines to nest. Again, this is a top predator. All the lower levels of the food chain, they also need those natural shorelines to spawn, to grow, to nest, whatever they might be doing. But everything that a loon eats is also relying on having some natural shoreline, having some emergent plants like cattails or bulrush. That's really important habitat. And then another huge part of this is that those natural shorelines, they buffer the lake from pollution. The only thing standing between all of the chemicals all throughout the watershed and our precious freshwater resources is these buffer zones of native plants. Those act as the filter, those are the buffer. They're able to transform those pollutants into growth and keep them out of our water. So shoreline development, it leads to both habitat loss and impaired water quality. This is a really, really big one for loons. So how does this nutrient pollution work? Why does it matter if we have a buffered shoreline? What happens is there's these little nutrients called phosphate and nitrate. They are found naturally in the environment, but at pretty low levels. But through things like fertilizer, industrial waste, agriculture waste, these excess nutrients, they get into the water. And because those extra nutrients are now in the water system, the plants just take off like crazy. And we get what we call harmful algal blooms. These really big, really icky mats of algae. And that blocks out the sun, so the plants that are growing from the bottom, they can't photosynthesize anymore. Then the oxygen levels are gonna go down, and species like fish, like a lot of our fish, they rely on high dissolved oxygen levels in the water. They're not gonna be able to survive. And then this cycle feeds back into itself, where eventually the bacteria are feeding on the algae as it's dying. That's depleting the oxygen even more. The aquatic animals are dying from lack of oxygen, and the decomposition of those animals is using even more oxygen. So it's just kind of an oxygen suck of the whole system. And what we call this process of a lake getting too many nutrients in it is eutrophication. And that's just a water body. It can be a lake, it can be a pond. It becomes over-enriched with nutrients. So we talked about this a little bit. We talked about phosphate and nitrate. Both of these are going to result in eutrophication. Nitrate also has a lot of human health impacts. That's something that our drinking water is always tested for. There are state-mandated standards that the nitrates have to fall under for water to be acceptable. But another big one, especially in the state of Minnesota, is chloride. The majority of this is from the de-icing salts that we use in the winter. And this doesn't really result in eutrophication. This is just straight up toxic. So once these chloride levels get above a certain concentration in the water, all kinds of animals start to die, especially the really sensitive ones like salamanders and like dragonfly larvae and damselfly larvae. And in addition to being just straight up toxic, it disrupts the natural lake mixing process. So again, it's when one piece of these ecosystems is thrown out of balance, every single piece of it is thrown out of balance. So if you are somebody that, you probably do use de-icing salt. I use de-icing salt. The DNR provides really great free trainings on smart salting to help you salt as effectively as you can and minimize the chloride runoff that we're putting into our water. And a kind of a crazy figure to visualize this here, if 1 pound of phosphorus ends up in the lake, 500 pounds of algae grow. So the effect is amplified 500 times. So a little bit of fertilizer can do a lot of damage. We're not going to go through every one of these points here, but this is a really good graphic kind of displaying what a natural shoreline might look like versus what a developed shoreline might look like. So this is much more brutalist. It's much more structured. We don't have any kind of buffer. We have a lot of building right up to the water. We've got some unsafe practices going on, like we've got an open oil can there, a gas can there. We've got the yard being mowed intensively. We've got fertilizers being sprayed. All of that stuff is going to run right into the lake and cause problems. On a natural shoreline, this is an exceptional shoreline. We've got not only a shoreline buffer, we've got emergent vegetation, and we've got a shoreland buffer further away from the water with those trees in there. So that soil isn't going anywhere. Erosion doesn't stand a chance on a property like that. These are some examples close to us at the Loons Center. These are both from Rush Lake, which is part of the whitefish chain. This is another NPR article that was really big over the summer, all about riprap and how it's being used in excess around the state of Minnesota. So these are some examples of shorelines that were dealing with erosion, and they went straight to riprap. Riprap's really, really expensive to install for starters, but additionally, it provides zero filtration. Everything coming from these yards, which are clearly fertilized and mowed extensively, is running right into our lakes. And sometimes erosion is a really big deal, and we do need to install a physical barrier to it. But there are opportunities like putting some soil in these, putting some plant plugs in these, where you can have both the stability of the rocks and the filtration powers of native plants. So something we can do in addition to that is shoreline restorations. If we have just kind of like a blah yard, or if we're dealing with erosion, there's a lot of opportunities to install native plants and structures to retain that square footage of your shoreline and protect your watershed. This is a really good example of a planted riprap strip. This is a really good example of a buffer zone, and they've got some planted riprap on the edge of that as well. This is using some coconut bundles with live stakes, and you can see that's loon friendly right there. That's the loon seal of approval. And again, this buffer zone we're talking about, this is going to be an area of land that's directly next to the lake. You clear it of any weeds and any like turf grass, and you replant it with native plants. The best way to do it is planting a mix of grass and forbs, so like flowering plants, and even maybe some shrubs in there. But a diverse array of plant species is going to give you maximum filtration power. This is another example of a shoreline restoration. This one doesn't look quite as dramatic, but this is using a strategy called willow wattle, which is these, I mean, first of all, what a fun thing to say. Willow wattle? Yeah. But you can see that it's in this long bundle here, it's wrapped up, and then it's staked into place with these live willow stakes. So even though this just looks like dead sticks, this is still a living tree. And this is gonna give the opportunity for shrubs to grow and further stabilize that shoreline, and it's also gonna provide a substrate for other plants to grow. So this is a really awesome, really popular method, especially around the whitefish chain. So why should I landscape for loons? If none of that convinced you, here's a few more selling points. So like we've said over and over, it protects water quality, it gives you filtration power, it looks really, really nice. Like that's beautiful. You're gonna have so many pollinators and insects and songbirds visiting your yard, and you're gonna have less of these guys visiting your yard. A lot of species that are maybe less desirable in your yard, like muskrats and geese, some of these destructive animals, they love a flat grassy lawn. If they see something like this, they're not gonna be as keen to just hang out there and poop there for months. This also, like we mentioned, it retains your square footage on your shoreline. This is a really good defense against erosion, especially with the increasing amounts of boat activity on our lakes. Erosion is a really big concern for a lot of property owners. And using shoreline restoration, even a little bit on your property, is gonna have big benefits for both you and the ecosystem. Some tips for landscaping for loons. There's lots of great information about this in the handouts on the table as well. But some steps you can take, if you've got native plants on your shoreline, leave them there. Maybe plant some more of the ones you've already got on your shoreline. You can reduce the use of fertilizer, herbicides, de-icing salts, and pesticides in your yard. Sometimes we've got to use these things, just the facts of life, but make sure you're protecting against these things running off into your lake, and be smart about how you use them. If you need to use some herbicides, maybe don't spray it willy-nilly all over the place, and have targeted applications of it. Another thing that's really helpful is no-mow zones. So maybe you want to mow most of your yard, but leaving a strip near the shoreline that you don't mow at all and you just let grow and establish a really strong root system, that's super helpful. It also helps, even if you are going to mow your whole lawn, leave it on a little bit longer of a setting. That's again going to help that root structure retain integrity. If you are on a private septic system, make sure you take care of it. Pump it about every 3 years or whatever your installer recommendation is. That's again going to prevent those nitrates and phosphates from seeping into the lake. If you want to have a nice sandy beach, maybe just have a tiny nice sandy beach. Or share it with the neighbors. We don't need to have the whole side of a lake be this sandy beach with no filter of any kind of vegetation. And then we've already said it, but consider getting involved in a shoreline restoration program. Since you folks are here with the Watershed District, I'm guessing a lot of you already know about this stuff. You're already pretty well connected with resources, but again, we've got lots over there. Your watershed districts, your soil and water conservation districts, these are going to be great resources for you to not only figure out what would be helpful to do, but get some help paying for it. And if you are not a lakefront property owner, as I am not a lakefront property owner, like we mentioned, the health of the entire watershed is influencing the health of these lakes that our loons live in. So everything that happens in the city, on the farms, in the mountains, in my backyard, that is all coming into the same place and affecting the same body of water. So there are still things you can do even if you just have a small yard that's 20 miles from a lake. A lot of these are going to be the same principles of if you had a shoreline property, no mow zones, take care of your septic, plant native vegetation, and be smart about how you use fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides. Rain gardens and pollinator gardens, you can kind of do them anywhere. So a rain garden, it is built where the low point of your yard is, and essentially before that water enters the groundwater, it's going to get filtered out through the beautiful plants that you put there. And they're going to have a nice supply of water every time it rains. These pollinator gardens, they can look all kinds of different ways, but they're going to support a lot of different insects, a lot of different birds. In Minnesota, we have an endangered species called the rusty-patched bumblebee. And these backyard pollinator plantings are super, super, super important for the rusty-patched bumblebee, especially here in the metro area. Excuse me, central Minnesota. Yeah. We're not going to go through this for time, but this is a really helpful infographic video about how to evaluate your shoreline. It's called Minnesota DNR Score Your Shore. It's something you can easily look up. We'll also try to get this slideshow to you guys so you can reference it. So kind of a summary of what we've talked about here. And this at the Loons Center is what we call our Share Our Shoreline Education Initiative. It's pretty much boiling down all of these complicated concepts into succinct points about coexisting with loons and being responsible stewards of our freshwater resources. We've got number 1, fish loons safe. Don't cast right in a loon's face. Switch to non-lead fishing tackle. Watch your wake. Be mindful of no wake zones. Keep 200 feet between your boat and the shore before you start generating a wake. And if you see a loon, slow down a little bit. Wave high. Give it a little space. Again, give it a little space. 100 feet is great. If they get closer than that on their terms, that's great for you. Clean, drain, and dry. So follow the Minnesota laws and take it a step further if you do so wish. And make sure that your gear is cleaned between water bodies. And then finally, landscape for loons. Plant native plants, maintain a natural shoreline. If you don't live on the lake, landscape for pollinators and for rain gardens. We've got lots we can do. Another plug for something you folks might be interested in, there's a guy named Doug Tallamy who has a homegrown national parks initiative. He's got a lot of really incredible information about the power that each and every one of us has to create habitat in our own yards. And I don't know how we're looking time-wise, but we're probably going to skip through the discussion here.
We do want to do trivia though.
Yeah.
That's a must. Because we just threw a lot of information about you guys, and I want to give Adam a second
Pass
too.
around Post-it notes. If you would like the beautiful print that was donated, put your name on a Post-it note. We'll collect them all, and before everybody takes off, we'll draw for the winner of the beautiful print. So Post-it notes floating around. Put your name on.
Cool, thanks Adam. So while you guys are doing that, we threw a lot of information at you, and we want to make sure that you retained it, so we're going to quiz you. I promise we're not grading it, it's fine. We just want to throw a couple questions at you to see if you remembered it, see if you remember the most important things we talked about. And then if you have, I want to say this before we get too obsessed with the trivia, because I get trivia happy. If you have one of the evaluation forms, either from the National Loon Center or from Adam, you can set those on the table before you leave. We'll collect them from you. You can please, if you didn't sign up for the hoop, if you want to receive our newsletter, please do that. If you want to grab swag over there from us or from the Watershed District, please do that. We also have a Loons and Lakes Festival coming to Cross Lake on June 26th and 27th, so put that on your calendar because that is going to be a super fun weekend full of lots of loony activities, including our pontoon tours, so check that out. Check out our socials, website, all that good stuff. Let's do trivia.
All right. So, what United States state is home to the most common loons? A, Alaska, B, Maine, C, Minnesota, or D, Wisconsin?
I think everyone just shout it out.
Oh, you're so smart. It's Alaska. Yeah. Oop. Okay. How many different calls do loons make? 4. Look at that. It is 4. How many species of loons are there in the loon family?
Hold on,
5.
everybody name them. What's one?
Yellow-billed, red-throated,
Red-throated.
Arctic, Pacific. You nailed it. Where do loons from Minnesota go in the winter? Yes. Wow, you guys are geniuses. Coastal waters and southern inland lakes. How many eggs do loons typically lay in a year? 2. Woohoo! Which of the following are threats to loons in Minnesota? All of the above, absolutely. This shoreline needs a makeover. Which landscaping for loons practices could turn it into productive loon habitat? B. Very good. What local resources can you reach out to for questions about shoreline and watershed protection? All of the above. Very, very good.
That was my creative way of segueing to Adam to talk about the resources that the Watershed District offers.
So one quick question. So when the juvenile loons don't come back for 3 to 5 years, do they just hang out in the Gulf, or where do they?
They just have a nice little spring break down in Florida.
Do they come back to where they were hatched, or?
They typically do return to their natal lake if their natal lake is not available. Natal lake, by the way, is the lake that they were born in. That's the fancy term. They'll go to a lake that has similar qualities to their native lake. So if they're born in a really big one, they're going to want to live in a really big one.
Question. On the loan platforms, can anybody just go build one and put them on a lake, or do you have to have a permit or anything like that?
That's a great question. So there is, once again, there is a sheet over there. If you didn't grab that, if you want one, you can absolutely take one. There's some information about some of the guidelines to follow. But yes, there are some steps that you need to take before you decide to put your platform out. Anyone can do it. We just want to make sure that you are doing it in a way that is going to be productive for your lake. We want it to work. We don't want you to put out a platform and put all this effort into it and then not have loons nest ever. So we recommend getting a hold of the DNR. Probably is the best way to do it down here. They will help you with the non-get wildlife program. Whoever the representative is in your district will be probably who comes out to evaluate your shoreline, help you decide the best place to put it. There is a permit through your local sheriff's office that you need to obtain because it's a temporary structure on the water, so you have to have a permit for that. And then we just want to know how it's doing, so the DNR wants to be involved so that they can get information about how your platform is performing. So anyone can do it. You can do a lake association. An individual could do it. But yeah, we want to know about it because we want to know how it's going, and we want to know that it's working and help you make it as best as it can be. Good question.
Yeah, we'll hand it off to Adam here, but we'll be around for a little bit longer after that, so you can keep asking us questions, or I'll leave our emails up there. Both of us would be happy to hear more from you.
And I won't get super windy, but there is a ton of resources over on the information table, including stuff from the Watershed. If you're interested in doing a shoreline restoration, rain garden, rain barrels, things like that, we can help cost share that. We have multiple different programs, all the way from $500 mini grants up to $8,000 shoreline restoration grants. You're entitled to a site visit. You want us to come out, look at your property, we'll come out. You're paying taxes, so you're paying our wages. Everybody in the district can also get a free soil test if you're interested. If you don't live in the Watershed, shoot me an email, get a hold of me. I can get you to the right people in your neck of the woods. Do I need to stall a little bit more, Jackie? A little bit more. The other handouts that are over there. So this is our Watershed Connections lecture series. We have 4 events. This was the first one. Our next one is on PFAS, and that's here as well. February, ooh, I didn't grab the flyer, 9th, I think. And then we have one on climate resilient trees. As climate changes a little bit, as we have emerald ash borer and other trees, we're looking at good substitutes. So the U of M is doing that one. And then as was mentioned, our last one, the U is doing some really good research, and they're finding out lakes that have zebra mussels, the fish tissue, walleyes, perch, things like that, actually tends to bioaccumulate mercury even more. So we're going to have a lecture on that to talk about why that happens, kind of implications of that. So everybody that wanted to enter threw their name in the hat. No pressure, Jackie, draw one. So it is the print that's over there. It is a local artist. Her cards are also over there. I'm going to go with Dale White. There you go. There's our winner. Thank you all for coming. This is our best turnout for an event we've had in a while, at least the Watershed Connections. I know they're going to hang out a little bit. There's a few Watershed staff here. Grab some info, hang out if you want. Otherwise, thank you very much for attending.